Hello, this is a top priority global announcement addressed to all world-class thinkers and philosophers and all agencies concerned about the betterment of the future of mankind. Today, I'll be introducing to the world a very special person that the world should know, Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi. He is a distinguished philosopher and a world-class thinker with concerns and projects targeting all mankind. I'll be presenting to the English-speaking world and beyond an overview in English of his main theories, his main project, and this is prepared and presented to you by Hisham Muhammad Gurban. Here's how Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi looks like. As you can see, he is an Arab, and here he is giving a keynote speech in the World Government Summit. Here's another look with a beautiful smile in his home library. Who is Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi? Let's not waste time by introducing him in a very classic way. Let's better introduce him first via and through his theories. So we'll introduce Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi via his theories. This slide highlights and presents the main theories for Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi. As you can see, there are 5 main theories formulated by Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi. Theory number 1, and that's the title of the theory: humans are spontaneous creatures. In Arabic, it says al-insanu ka'inun tilqa'i. And each theory of those will be explained in more detail later in the presentation. Theory number 2, formulated by Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi: human brain is occupied, controlled, and shaped by whoever gets to it first. Theory number 3, ignorance is the original and default human state. Theory number 4, creative pioneers and enabling societal support. Theory number 5, the genius of spontaneous human interest. So this slide, as I said earlier, highlights the five main theories formulated by Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi. More details about each theory will be presented in the coming slides. His main lifetime project is to establish the science of ignorance in order to free the human brain. And I emphasize all the human brain of all races, of all mankind. Prior to explaining his theories, let's show some of the covers of his books, and that will give you some glimpses about his areas of concern. Here's a book by Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi, The Anatomy of Backwardness. Here's another book that contains dialogue with him, dialogues about culture and thinking. Here's a book by Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi, The Walls of Backwardness. Another book, which is a group of dialogues with him, Human Spontaneity, Dialogues with Ibrahim Al Bulaihi. Here's another book by Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi, Pioneers and Enabling Societal Acceptance. Another book, The Genius of Human Spontaneity. Here's a nice quotation I'd like to introduce Mr. Al Bulaihi through. The more I ponder at human reactions, I get more convinced that the human mind becomes a farce when it's petrified. the essence of the true human mind is only realized when it is completely freed to become an independent and examining critic. Here's another book written about him, containing many of his ideas. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi, the thinker of the Second Renaissance. Theory number 1. Humans are spontaneous creatures. Humans are spontaneous creatures. Let me try to explain this theory using the words of Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi as much as possible. And I'll explain it in the form of bullets. Bullet number 1. Humans are not born with a ready brain. Humans are born with ready capabilities and abilities that will help them learn. Humans absorb through their senses from their societies and learn during the first 5 or 6 years of their lifetime. So they see, they hear, they taste, they feel. All the 5 senses and even the 6 senses absorb knowledge, compile knowledge that goes into the human brain, and that forms as you call it, a copy of the prevailing culture. So each human being, when he is born, he is a copy of the prevailing culture in which he lives. What is the spontaneous aspect here? The spontaneous is the most important theme in that theory, and it goes as follows. He's drawing our attention that each human being learns or absorbs lots of knowledge in the first 5 or 6 years of his lifetime in a spontaneous way. And in this spontaneous way lies the danger. All of those pieces of knowledge that are absorbed through the senses in the first 5 or 6 years of his lifetime, if each one of us are absorbed in a spontaneous, non-examining, non-critical, non-scrutinizing way. It means knowledge are dumped into a brain and they're accepted as facts. Okay? He describes the human brain, or the human mind, as composed of 2 main sets. The main operating system, which is the copy of the prevailing culture in which he lives, which is formed basically in the first 5 to 6 years in a spontaneous, non-critical, non-examining, non-scrutinizing way. In simpler words, this operating system analog, similar to operating system, is formed in a non-examining way, meaning it did not form through a methodical system of accuracy and check. So it formed, and it remains with each one of us. On top of that, we build our life skills. This is like the lifetime toolbox. So we get degrees, we get education, but degrees and education lies on that operating system, which is an exact carbon copy of the prevailing culture that has been formed during the first 5 to 6 years of the lifetime of each one of us in a non-critical way. Let me explain it further. So we grow, and this operating system and the carbon copy, the spontaneous copy that we have, that has been imprinted upon us from our cultures, is the base for everything we learn. Let me give you an example. Let's say somebody from the Amazon, okay, He grew up in the Amazon in the first 5 or 6 years of his lifetime. He absorbed the Amazon culture, the Amazon beliefs, the Amazon value system. After that, he went to school. After that, he went to the States or Europe, and he got education. So if we were to look at his mind, you will find two things: a carbon copy of the prevailing culture that was formed in a spontaneous, non-critical way, and it is deposited there. And on top of that, we learn some skills that will help us in our lifetime, and this is the lifetime toolbox. The danger lies is that from the fact that this carbon copy of the prevailing culture that is imprinted upon us in a spontaneous, non-critical, non-scrutinizing way in the first 5 or 6 years of our lifetime has lots of information. Based on this information, we establish some ways our identity. Who are we? Who am I? Who is that different? What is good? What is bad? Whom should I like? Whom should I dislike? Who is the friend? Who is the enemy? And all those information have been formed, as I said, in a spontaneous way, meaning there are no valves, there are no checks, there are no critiques of this knowledge that was imprinted upon us from the prevailing culture in our first 5 to 6 years of our lifetime, of each one of us. So the implication is that each one of us, or each human being, is biased to his own culture. He can even take a very strong stance towards other cultures. They don't like it. He doesn't like it. He feels that if they are different, they are the enemy. He's willing to even sacrifice his own life to prove and defend his own culture. So lots of his decisions, lots of his views, lots of his outlooks are based on a carbon copy of the prevailing culture that was formed early in our childhood without any scrutiny. So here's a non-methodical, non-scientific, non-scrutinized, non-criticized foundation. So all the bias, all the feeling right versus that the others are wrong are matters of question. They're not sure. They're not facts. One of the practical implications for realizing that we are, as humans, are spontaneous creatures, and the main component of our characters, of our minds, has been imprinted upon us in a spontaneous, non-critical, non-scientific. There are no checkpoints. There is no accuracy checks. Is that for us to stop and think? Are we really that correct? Are we really that right? Are we right in claiming that we are right? Is everything we stand for is right and is correct and is true? And the irony is that the human mind is not capable, is not equipped with a built-in faculty or mechanism to check the accuracy of what's inside it. So once the information is inside us, inside our brains, and we grow up with it, it stays there. And such spontaneous imprints of the prevailing cultures becomes us, becomes who we are. We don't feel it. No one doubts what he is. He doubts the different. There are more details to this theory, but the global impact is very scary. And if we succeeded, if Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi's theory succeeds in drawing the attention of all mankind, of all world agencies, to the fact that the components of our character, the key component of our character, of our characters, of our mind, that has been imprinted upon us without any scrutiny in our early childhood, is not a strong foundation, is not an examined and is not accuracy checked foundation for any knowledge. So spontaneous knowledge cannot be true. And even if parts of it were matching the truth, this is just random, just mere luck. So bias will be eliminated via understanding this theory. Loss of hatred between different humans will be minimized, reduced via understanding this theory, and hopefully bridges of mutual understanding will start to extend based on and beginning with self-critique. Before I judge others, I should look and examine my spontaneous imprint of the prevailing culture. Part of me was formed, imprinted in my mind, in my character, without any check of its accuracy, without any check of whether it is right or wrong. Yeah, let me repeat the title of this theory by Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi. Theory number 2. Human brain is occupied, controlled, and shaped by whoever gets to it first. Human brain is occupied, controlled, and shaped by whoever gets to it first. This theory, number 2, is a result of theory number 1, that humans are spontaneous creatures. So the mind, the human mind, when we are born, is empty, is unshaped, uncontrolled, is neutral. We have ready-to-use capabilities, and we use our senses in the first 5 to 6 years of our life, for each one of us, to absorb knowledge in a spontaneous, non-critical, non-scrutinized, non-checked way. And then this becomes like the operating system and the main component of our characters and our minds. So in reality, whoever gets to our mind first gets to shape it, gets to control it, gets to guide it. So whoever the imprinting of a copy of the prevailing surrounding culture into our minds comes without any competition. So whoever gifts our mind first is like an occupier that shapes it and guides our minds. So it's a result of the first theory, and the practical implication is very straightforward, but at the same time it is scary. And let me combine both theories together to explain theory number 2. In theory number 1, we did explain that we as humans are born not with filled minds, filled brains, but brains with ready capabilities, ready to learn capabilities. And we absorb through our senses from our prevailing and surrounding culture lots of knowledge. Who is our friend? Who is different? Who is good? Who is bad? Who are we? So many pieces of information that are absorbed through our senses and deposited into our minds, into our brains, without checking the accuracy first, without any scrutiny, without any double check. So that's a spontaneous nature. So that makes our mind occupiable. So whoever gets to our mind as early as possible in our life, he's the occupier. So although we claim we are free thinkers, each culture people claim and think, and probably think strongly, that free thinkers, in many ways, our minds have been occupied by the first who got to it, have been shaped, occupied, guided. So the practical implication that should make us feel humble based on theory number one, that main component of our characters, our minds, have been deposited, formed through our senses into our mind without any scrutiny, without any check valves. So big components of who we are, big components of the information inside us, have been dumped into our minds without any scrutiny, without any check. So, and as I mentioned earlier, a human mind doesn't have any faculty or mechanism of distinguishing what's right and what's wrong of the stuff which is already inside it, especially that stuff that was deposited, that had entered the mind early in our lifetime. And as children, we have no abilities to distinguish between right and wrong. So all those pieces of information that forms the main components of our characters, of our minds, which is nothing but a carbon copy of the surrounding and prevailing culture. We're nothing but copies of our parents, copies of our surrounding culture. There are individual variations, I do grant you that, but the main components are the same. So this theory is summarized: human brains, every human being is occupied, controlled, and shaped by whoever gets to it first. That should really teach us humbleness, teach us not to feel so right about being right, feel self-righteous. That should lead to self-critique, self-doubt, and that should lead to a sincere desire to discover the truth and to re-examine the so-called facts that have been deposited, imprinted upon us during the early years of our childhood. And at the same time, when we look at others, we have to realize they have also their brains, their characters, their cultures have been formed, imprinted upon them in a spontaneous, automatic way, without any scrutiny. So we don't blame them. They are equally spontaneous like us. We are spontaneous, and they are spontaneous. Their mind, the mind of those who are different, is controlled by those who control it, by the so-called guardians of the prevailing culture. And so are our minds. Our minds are controlled by those who got to it first, the guardians of our cultures. So this is the second theory by Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi, and it says every human brain is occupied, controlled, and shaped by whoever gets to it first. That really should cultivate humbleness, reduce bias, and make us reflect upon ourselves, and make us realize that we need to begin a new journey of re-examining what we have learned in a spontaneous and non-checking, non-scrutinizing way. In this slide, we present theory number 3 that has been formulated by Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi. And the title of this theory, as you can see in the slide, states: ignorance is the original and default human state. Ignorance is the original and default human state. This theory, number 3, is in reality derived, or a result, from theory number 1 and theory number 2. In theory number 1, just to remind you, Mr. Al Bulaihi said that humans are spontaneous creatures, and the summary of that, in the first 5 to 6 years of the life of each one of us, a copy of the prevailing and surrounding culture is imprinted, is copied into us through many pieces of knowledge that goes inside our brains without passing through any filters or any mechanism to check the accuracy or the falsehood of those pieces of information. And this is, as I said earlier, similar to the operating system for computers. So this component of who we are has been formed during our childhood without any critique, without passing through filters, without checking the accuracy first. So that makes the original state that we have as humans, that's the original state he's referring to. The original state is information that wasn't verified. So it is not knowledge, it is ignorance. So what we have, the first imprint from our prevailing culture that was dumped, copied, sneaked, allowed to go into our minds during our early childhood, okay, are pieces of knowledge, interrelated pieces of knowledge that formed who we are, formed the so-called operating system, did not pass through any accuracy check, so it cannot be knowledge. So that's why our original state, as all humans of all races, is not knowledge, is not knowing. It is not knowing. So what we have is not knowledge. It's something cannot be called knowledge. So ignorance is the original and default human state. And also theory number 2 did mention that our minds are occupied, shaped and guided by whoever gets to it first. So this theory is a beautiful theory as well. Ignorance is the original and default human state. And as I said earlier, it's a result and derivation from theory 1 and theory 2 of Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi. In the context of mentioning the word original or original, Mr. Al Bulaihi emphasized one point, and it's a crucial point, that not everything we refer to in our cultures at large as original is good or correct. So originality is not equivalent, is not the same notion as correctness. So we need to revise and revisit and correct even the notion of originality. So not every original is correct. Not every original is good. Not every original is accurate. Going back to the theory, or let's continue with that notion of originality. So one cannot simply jump to the conclusion that because something is original, it has to be good, it has to be accurate. Okay, and just because it's not enough to say that something is original and we have inherited this and we have inherited this from our ancestors. Okay, it is accurate. Okay, so not every original is accurate. The original state of all humans, that they are spontaneous and their minds are occupied by whoever gets to it first. And each one of us carries in his minds, in his characters, a big component, which is nothing but a copy, an imprint of the prevailing culture, a program by the prevailing and surrounding culture. We also, as humans, trust a lot to this pre-programming and this imprinting by the prevailing culture. We even go beyond trust, and we think this imprinting by the prevailing culture into our minds is the truth. And as Mr. Al Bulaihi, as I mentioned, as I quoted Mr. Al Bulaihi earlier, the human mind is not equipped with the built-in faculty or mechanism to check the accuracy of what is already into it. So the mind cannot doubt what it has gotten used to. And this makes human being an ideological creature, meaning he is controlled by an ideology. And this ideology is that spontaneous state that we talked about in theory number 1. And that spontaneous state is entrapping the human being, entrapping our outlooks, because it stays with us all our lifetime. And we cannot break away from this pre-programming, imprinting by the prevailing culture unless we are shocked, met by big shocks, big challenges that trigger and activate the critical ability or faculty of our minds. So the critical ability in our minds, when activated enough, it will re-examine notions and outlooks. It will eliminate some of those false and off outlooks and replace bad notions or wrong notions by more correct and checked notions. So that makes humans, without any exceptions, are photocopies. So in other words, we are culturally reproduced, meaning we are photocopied. So reproduction is not the reproduction of our DNA and our flesh and bones and blood, but reproduction is also occurring in terms of our mind and mind states and characters. So human beings are, without any exceptions, are culturally reproduced, photocopied. So the original state, which is ignorance, that has been formed in the first 5 to 6 years, and we think it is the truth. So the original state is that we are pre-programmed by the prevailing culture, and we are so sure of this pre-programming, and we think it is knowledge, truth, and absolute truth, and we look at it different as ignorance and inaccurate and myths. Humans go even a step further with this, that they are so proud of this original state, proud of their ignorance, so to speak, that was formed in a spontaneous way, and that was formed without any critique, without check of any of its accuracy, without even any choice. So we're ignorant, and we're proud of being ignorant. So ignorance is the original and default human state, and we're proud of that as well. And we think others are inaccurate, off, and they don't have the truth. Speaking of ignorance, or the ignorance default state, the ignorant default state of all humans, that state is not it's not something fluffy, it's not something that has no substance. To the contrary, it's not a vacuum. To the contrary, it's something solid. All those pieces of knowledge that has been dumped into our brains during our childhood and formed who we are, formed the original ignorant state of who we are, form interrelated components, an interrelated solid entity. So that ignorant state is not something fluffy, it's something strong, solid, resistant as well. And what type of ignorance is it? There are two types of ignorance: simple ignorance and complex and compounded ignorance. Simple ignorance is the state of is either not knowing or knowing something wrong, and then you get the information that corrects what you don't know, or gives you what you don't know, and that resolves it. I don't know the name of that thing, so once I know the name, that resolves the ignorance in that aspect. That's a simple type of ignorance. But Mr. Al Bulaihi said the original and default human state of ignorance is not of the simple type. It is of the complex and compounded ignorance type. What is complex? What is the complex and compounded ignorance? And it is the original and the default human state. It means that humans are ignorant and are not aware of their ignorance, and we think our ignorance is science, facts, and the truth. Through our spontaneous imprinting, our spontaneous early upbringing, we did not learn to verify before learning. We have to learn that eventually, but in our spontaneous early upbringing, we learn without learning to verify before learning. And that explains the trap or the trapping effect of the compounded and complex ignorance that makes each one of us so proud and so happy because we think we have the truth. Another aspect of the impact of the prevailing culture, the impact of the pre-programming of each one of us by his and her surrounding culture, is the elimination of the individual inclinations. So the individual inclinations are eliminated, reduced, minimized, and sometimes fully eradicated. Unfortunately, all human beings at large are busy with the little that they know, to the extent that they are not paying attention to the much bigger thing that they don't know. They're so busy with what they know, to the extent that they're not learning what they don't know. Even if you go to the society level, every society is proud of what it is. Every society is proud of its prevailing culture. Every society is proud by its pre-programming and imprinting. It's very important to re-emphasize that the compounded ignorance state, which is the original and default human state, is not something easy, is not something fluffy, it's something solid, resistant, and it's not a transient state, because this state lives with us, continues with us. So ignorance in that state, as per that description by Mr. Al Bulaihi, becomes the original state and becomes the default, and it does continue with us. And the irony is, whenever our ignorant state is confronted, challenged by many attempts to change it, we become extra defensive and we hold on strongly to our ignorance. So that ignorant, original and default human state is solid and resistant to change, and the more you attack it, the more it gets defensive and holds on to itself, because that state is viewed internally through us as the truth, while it's not. If we were to think about the application or the applications of this theory number 3, that state that ignorance is the original and default human state, we can think of the following applications. First, we would not be surprised to see how defensive and how resistant to change humans are, because that default and original state is not something easy. It's a solid entity, and it is defensive. So dealing with change, or trying to introduce some new ideas, we have to keep in mind that theory that simply state that the original and default state of humans is ignorance. And another implication or application is that this theory also should teach us, as theory number 1 and 2 did, to be humble, as the original and default state of each one of us is ignorance. In summary, pieces of knowledge that was formed, imprinted upon us in our early childhood, without any filters, without any check of accuracy, without any verification. Application number 3. Knowing that theory should teach us the importance of verifying before learning. Verifying before learning. So, verification should precede learning. Philosophers say doubt is the way towards the truth. So to learn without passing through a critical phase, this is very dangerous, and it becomes extra dangerous keeping in mind that ignorance is our original and default human state. Third theory, creative pioneers and societal support. Creative pioneers and societal support. Let me do my best to summarize this theory. There are more. I hope I'm doing a good job in summarizing his theory. Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi's theory is an observation through the span of human life. So throughout all human life, all human history, there are pioneers. The pioneers, and he gives a special definition for the pioneers. These pioneers are those individuals, humans. They are individuals, actually, who dare to go and cross the limit of the prevailing culture, the prevailing norm. So those who dare to step out of the walls and the limits of the prevailing culture and the prevailing norms are the pioneers. I mean, they dare to look at things differently and to present these things differently, and they dare to do that in the face of the prevailing culture and its guards and its walls. Okay, that's half of the theory. The other half is on societal support. Let's put both together. So throughout the history of human mankind, there were many individual pioneers, not so many, but many individual pioneers who dared to step out the limits, the walls of the prevailing cultures, who managed to break their spontaneous nature, going back to theory number 1, and managed to free themselves, their minds, from the occupation of those who first got to it. And in that context, breaking away from the enslavement or entrapment by the prevailing culture and the occupier is not an easy thing. It needs a huge and a gigantic shock that makes that person questions, that disturbs his or her peace, to the extent that he questions a lot, and then he breaks his spontaneous nature, and he is beginning a journey to be a free thinker. Let's summarize the theory: creative pioneers and societal support. So he said, throughout the history of mankind, there were many pioneers, and pioneers are those who dared truly to step out of the limits, the norms, the walls. In that context, those scientists who managed to extend upon a previous knowledge, they're not pioneers. They're simply extending upon previous knowledge. But those who dared to step out. And how will we know that? Usually they are rejected strongly, because they have shaken the walls. They have rocked the boat. So those pioneers are usually rejected by their people, rejected by their cultures. And cultures vary through history, not by the availability of pioneers. Pioneers do exist everywhere. But cultures vary by the level or extent of accepting and accommodating those pioneers. Most of the cultures reject, shun, even kill those pioneers to preserve the prevailing culture. So true development happens when a culture has pioneers and it has sufficient societal support that enables those pioneers to do something. So pioneers do exist, are available throughout history, but some eras through the history shine better or more than others because of presence of the complementing element, which is societal support for those pioneers. He looks at the last 400 years of the human history, Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi, and he said, mankind and the Anglo-Saxon culture, race in particular, has managed to yield lots of knowledge, lots of achievement and explorations, okay, because two elements did exist together: creative pioneers complemented with enough societal support. So those pioneers were supported, accommodated, welcomed, helped, endorsed in the last 400 years much better, much more than others in the previous eras of history. Application of the theory. Encouraging pioneers is very important, but the missing element and a more crucial element is to ensure that we are, as cultures, as institutions, are welcoming, enabling, supporting, empowering those pioneers. Those pioneers will not do any change unless they are trusted, empowered, given the green light by many big agencies to do what they have to do, and then they will take mankind's culture and civilization to a higher level. And if you don't get sufficient support, they will simply be like a flame extinguished, and no improvement is done. And many of them could be killed, persecuted, and you will be remembered in history as traitors or heretics or crazy people. Theory number 4, the genius of spontaneous interest. This is one of the key theories of Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi. And in his books, one of his books, he cites lots of examples of physicians, okay, those who specialize in medicine, and that they have spent years studying medicine, but however, they are not famous for medicine. They're famous for other specialties. such as writers in literature, such as other areas that make him famous, not medicine. It means man is capable of studying anything, even if it doesn't suit its original call, original inclination. But however, the true genius, the true genius of mankind is materialized when we study something spontaneously, meaning when we study something spontaneously out of our own genuine interest, not coerced, not forced to study. So a direct implication is that we are spending lots of our lifetime in coerced, forced forms of education. And those either primary education, schooling, colleges, and mankind is drifting away from its spontaneous interest. So why waste our lifetime studying something that we don't really like, and it doesn't match the natural calling inside us, the natural genius inside us? So why not reinvent education to focus on the spontaneous and the natural interests of each human being? If each human being gets to discover, whereas is helped to discover his and her spontaneous and natural interest and pursues it, genius will unfold. To the contrary of that is what's happening in our lifetime. We are forced to study something we don't like. We spend our lifetime studying something we don't like just to make a living. And that either kills our genius or delays finding and unfolding and unraveling our genius to a later stage in our life. So, and all of us, so the realization of the full potential or realization of more potential of the human mind is done when one does what he naturally likes. He or he naturally likes. We know that humans excel at certain things naturally. So why do we delay this process of them achieving in the areas of their natural excellence, in the areas of natural and spontaneous interest, by wasting years and years of our lifetime in so-called formal, forced, one-size-fits-all education? And one can easily ponder at the global implications of such theory. It will reinvent education at large. We don't need this education in this form. We are studying what mankind is studying what they don't like. They can do it, but we are not materializing, not unfolding our inner greatness, not finding our true calling, not finding our spontaneous original interest. So far, I presented to you an overview with some details of the 5 main theories formulated by Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi. And as I mentioned earlier, I'd like to emphasize the fact that those theories are interrelated and they stem and result from each other. So it's a scheme of interrelated theories. And before moving to the next part of our presentation, I'd like to just summarize what we have mentioned. We've talked about theory number 1, humans are spontaneous creatures. Theory number 2, human brain, or the human brain is occupied, controlled, and shaped by whoever gets to it first. Theory number 3, ignorance is the original and default human state. Ignorance is the original and default human state. Theory number 4, creative pioneers and enabling societal support. Theory number 4, creative pioneers and enabling societal support. And theory number 5, the genius of spontaneous and human interest. The genius of spontaneous human interest. presentation to draw through the special minds of the world-class thinkers and world-class philosophers to this distinguished philosopher. Trust me, what I'm doing, I feel it's a global duty to introduce such a world-class thinker to mankind. And this is an attempt to present his work beyond the Arabic-speaking world. And I've just presented only the tip of the iceberg of his thoughts. And as I said earlier, the main mission, the main project of Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi is to free the human mind. Free the human mind. And now you can imagine how this project is done via his theories. World agencies like UNESCO, the UN, and all those, UNICEF, can benefit a lot from this. There are more details to his Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi, and as I says, they have global impact. And this is my personal attempt to help globalize his theories, introduce his theories to all the world, because I strongly believe, and his theories will explain itself for those who wants to pursue it further, has greater global impact on all mankind, of all races, everywhere. Your presenter here is me, Hisham Muhammad Korban. I'm a writer. Here's my email, here's my phone number. And my attempt in this global announcement, as I mentioned earlier, is to draw the attention of all world-class thinkers and philosophers and all people and world agencies concerned with the betterment, improvement of the future of mankind, to a special thinker named Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi, who has a scheme of organized theories that provide a foundation for his for his project that impacts the whole mankind. And I hope this will spur enough interest, and I look forward to world-class thinkers and philosophers. And I did put my email, and Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi, he is one of my mentors, and he's a teacher, he's an elder brother, he's a friend. And I feel it's my duty towards mankind to introduce his ideas, his theories. Let's hope this triggers a worldwide interest. Let's hope this will build bridges between Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi and world-class thinkers like Mr. Noam Chomsky and many others. I cannot mention names here, but such a world-class thinker is of great benefit to mankind, and it's time, or even it's even too late, or even too late to introduce him to the English-speaking world, but better late than never. I hope this global announcement receives the proper attention, and I'm more than happy to liaison and connect you with Mr. Ibrahim Al Bulaihi, and we'll hope to meet in world-class institutions such as Harvard, Oxford, Imperial College, and all the agencies that are concerned with world-class thinking and improvement and betterment of humankind, presence, future. Thank you.